I think that's an interesting question, and I do think we're starting to get to the point where the availability of offtake is constraining the Nordic market, and I think it's always been offtake constrained. So the question really is not the availability of projects, but is how can we deepen and broaden the pool of off-takers who are willing to sign long-term contracts with generators. So our base case would be that it remains at the kind of volume level we've seen over the last couple of years, but it's notably been in the last 2 years with 3 or 4 off-takers who are filling up their book. So the question really is who then will emerge to sign new contracts. Well, I think the Nordic market has a number of unique features which have been quite interesting. The first is really the fundamentals of projects, so the ability, because of geography and low population density, to develop and build very large-scale projects, large in spread and extent and numbers of turbines, but also large in the ability to deploy the very biggest, latest turbines, and to do that onshore rather than offshore where your costs are low. So it's been able to drive down costs through economies of scale and utilization of new technology. So that's one feature that simply can't be replicated in the same way because those conditions don't exist in other markets. I think another big thing that I love to spend time talking about is the liquid traded power markets, is Nord Pool. And if you could take Nord Pool and apply that extent of trading and liquidity and all the market timeframes involved in that to all the other markets in Europe, I think you'd come a huge way to developing new routes to market in lots and lots of countries. And I think for me that is one of the key things, because it's not just the ability to sign offtake contracts, but the ability to put lots of risk management tools and structures around private contracts that you sign that is quite key. And so those two things for me are the defining features, that and having a large industrial base of companies that have a long history or a big commitment in their strategy to that market, who use a lot of power and are interested in signing up contracts to use that and buy that power for the long term. So for me, those are 3 features that it will be hard to replicate to the same extent together in other markets, but we can learn a lot from them and apply them. So I think that there are a number of categories of risks to developing subsidy-free in the Nordics and in fact anywhere. And the risks are sometimes ones that you might not notice. So obviously you've got the risk of how you sell your power. Are you selling 100% of your volume? What are you doing with the rest of the volume? How can you hedge that? What is the price you're getting? What is the credit backing behind that price? All of that contractual stuff and counterparty stuff is there, and that's consistent. I also think because you are trying to deliver projects at very low cost, you've got lots of counterparty risk in your project, because the industry is going through a declining cost curve that's putting a lot of financial pressure on all participants in that market, and we're seeing investors having their returns compressed, but also manufacturers and construction companies having to cut their margins. So what you want to make sure is that you've really checked your counterparties and you're comfortable with the risk of them delivering and what you do if they're no longer there, which is perhaps something we don't talk about very often. But I actually think one of the most devastating things for a project would be counterparty risk like that coming through. So I think you've got some of those structures as well. And then you can create risk for yourself. In the end, it's a risk to delivery of your base case. And the more you push yourself to have a complex and unrealistic base case, the higher the risk you are taking that you fail to deliver that. So I think there are risks that you create for yourself. And then finally, leverage is always an increase in risk for an increase in return. And it's easy to add leverage that increases your risk faster than it increases your return. And so watching how people do that and thinking about, in the end, how have you got a competitive net margin that you can operate at in the long term after operating costs and after debt costs, I think is a useful way to think about it.